The first blow to my ribs sent me sprawling across the concrete floor. Blood filled my mouth as I tried to catch my breath in the suffocating darkness. "Pray to your God now," the guard sneered, his voice muffled through the black hood covering his face. "See if he hears you down here." I closed my eyes, feeling the cold metal of the chains cutting into my wrists. That's when I saw it. Through my swollen eyelids, a faint blue light beginning to pulse in the corner of our underground cell. The other prisoners fell silent. The air grew inexplicably warm, and the scent of roses filled the putrid space. Something impossible was happening in this forgotten place where we had been left to die. My name is Gabriel Oliveira. Just 3 months ago, I was leading a normal life as a missionary doctor in northern Brazil. I never imagined I would witness a miracle that would save not just my soul, but the lives of 15 fellow Christians who had been condemned to die for their faith. This is my testimony, a story I was forbidden to tell until now. I grew up in São Paulo in a middle-class neighborhood, the son of a mathematics professor and a nurse. My parents were devout Catholics who instilled in me both a love for science and a deep faith. From an early age, I was fascinated by medicine, by the human body's complexity and its capacity to heal. This dual passion for healing and faith led me to medical school, where I excelled despite the rigorous demands. While my classmates often questioned how I could reconcile my scientific mind with religious belief, I never saw contradiction between the two. For me, the intricate workings of the human body only confirmed the existence of divine design. After completing my residency in emergency medicine, I felt called to serve where the need was greatest. I joined Médicos da Esperança, Doctors of Hope, a Catholic medical mission that established clinics in remote areas. My first assignment took me to a small village near the border of Brazil and Venezuela, an area known for political instability, but also for communities with little to no healthcare access. The village of Santa Helena welcomed me warmly. I set up a modest clinic in what had once been a small church, working alongside Sister Maria, a nurse with 20 years of experience in missionary work, and Paulo, a local man who served as our translator and assistant. Together, we treated everything from minor infections to childbirth complications. The work was exhausting but fulfilling. Each night, I would fall asleep to the sounds of the jungle, grateful for the purpose I had found. What I didn't know was that our medical mission had attracted unwanted attention. The region had become a corridor for drug trafficking, and several criminal organizations were battling for control. They viewed outsiders with suspicion, particularly those connected to the church. For months, we operated without incident, naively believing our humanitarian work would protect us. But in this lawless territory, mercy was viewed as weakness, and faith as a threat to power. The first warning came in the form of a dead snake left on the clinic doorstep. Sister Maria dismissed it as a coincidence, but Paulo's face darkened. "This is a message," he whispered. "They say we are interfering." I asked who they were, but Paulo shook his head, unwilling to say more. That evening I noticed unfamiliar men watching our clinic from across the village square. They made no effort to hide their presence, smoking cigarettes and tracking our movements with cold, calculating eyes. I contacted our mission headquarters, reporting the concerning developments. They advised caution, but suggested we continue our work unless directly threatened. "Many places have initial resistance," the mission director explained. "Usually, when they see the benefits we bring, tensions ease." For a few weeks, it seemed he was right. The watchers disappeared, and we resumed our routines. On Sundays, we would join the village for Mass, celebrated by Father Tomás, who traveled between 5 different communities on a beaten motorcycle. After Mass, the villagers would share a communal meal, and for those hours it felt as though we were truly part of this place, that we belonged. Then, one Tuesday night in April, everything changed. I was awakened by urgent pounding on my door. It was Paulo, his face streaked with tears. "They've taken Father Tomás," he gasped. The cartel. They say he has been speaking against them to the authorities. And I quickly dressed and followed Paulo to the village elder's home, where a small crowd had gathered. Sister Maria was already there, her rosary beads moving steadily through her fingers as she prayed. The village elder, a weathered man named Joaquim, explained that Father Tomas had been ambushed on his way back from a neighboring community. 2 other catechists were with him, Joaquim said grimly. All 3 were taken. The villagers looked to me expectantly, as though I might have some solution. I felt wholly inadequate. What could a doctor do against armed criminals? We must contact the authorities, I insisted, but my words were met with bitter laughter. The authorities? One man spat. They are either bought or too afraid to come here. No one will help us. Sister Maria spoke up, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. Then we must help ourselves. First we pray, then we find where they are being held. That night marked the beginning of our quiet resistance. Using Paulo's connections, we began gathering information about the cartel that had taken Father Tomas and the others. We learned they were held in an abandoned mining facility about 20 kilometers from the village. We also discovered something more disturbing. Father Tomas wasn't the only religious figure who had disappeared. Over the past year, various pastors, priests, and religious workers had vanished across the region, particularly those who spoke out against the cartels or helped community members escape forced recruitment. Against Sister Maria's advice, I volunteered to join a small group of villagers who planned to scout the mining facility. I'm a doctor, I argued. If they're injured, they'll need medical attention. Reluctantly, she agreed, making me promise to remain hidden and only observe. We set out before dawn, traveling through dense jungle on foot to avoid detection. By midday, we reached a ridge overlooking the facility, a collection of crumbling concrete buildings surrounded by a rusted fence. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their weapons prominently displayed. Using binoculars, I scanned the complex, noting the building with the most security, a low, windowless structure at the center. That's where they'd keep prisoners, whispered Luis, a former military man who had joined our scouting party. As we watched, a truck arrived. Several hooded figures were unloaded, stumbling as they walked with hands bound behind their backs. My heart sank as I counted 6 new prisoners. The crisis was larger than we'd imagined. We returned to the village with our findings, but no clear plan. That evening, as I documented what we had seen, a young boy arrived at the clinic, breathless with news. More people taken, he panted, from the next village. The cartel says they are purging the region of religious influence. For 3 days, we debated what to do. Contact international organizations? Try to reach federal authorities? Some villagers wanted to mount a rescue themselves, but with the cartel's weapons and numbers, it would be suicide. On the 4th day, our decision was made for us. I was finishing my morning rounds when the clinic door burst open. 5 men with assault rifles ordered everyone to the floor. Their leader, a scar-faced man with cold eyes, walked directly to me. "Dr. Oliveira," he said, pronouncing my name with mocking precision. "Your services are required elsewhere." I was blindfolded and thrown into a vehicle. The drive seemed to last hours, with multiple turns designed to disorient me. When the blindfold was removed, I found myself in a dimly lit office. A well-dressed man sat behind a desk, his face obscured in shadow. "A doctor," he began conversationally. "I understand you've been inquiring about certain guests of ours." "I'm looking for Father Tomas and the others you've taken," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "They've done nothing wrong." The man laughed softly. "Nothing wrong. They undermine our authority. They fill people's heads with ideas about morality and justice, when all that matters here is power and obedience." He leaned forward, his face catching the light, handsome, educated, and utterly cold. "You have 2 choices, Doctor. Join those you seek as a prisoner, or use your skills to serve us. We occasionally need medical expertise." I thought of Sister Maria, of the village depending on our clinic. If I treat your men, will you release Father Tomas and the others? His smile widened. So naive. No, doctor, but I might let you see them. Consider it professional courtesy. I understood then that I had no real choice. Refusing would mean immediate imprisonment or death, while cooperation might at least allow me to locate the missing Christians. I'll treat your wounded, I said quietly. For 2 weeks, I lived in a strange limbo, kept in relatively comfortable quarters, and brought to treat various cartel members suffering from bullet wounds, infections, and other ailments. I was watched constantly, never allowed to speak freely with anyone. I tried asking about Father Tomas, but my queries were met with silence or threats. Then one night, my guard received a phone call that changed his demeanor. "Come," he ordered, roughly pulling me from my bed. "Your skills are needed urgently." We drove to the mining facility I had observed weeks earlier. Inside the central building, I was led down a concrete staircase into what could only be described as a dungeon. The stench hit me first. Blood, excrement, fear. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw cells lining a narrow corridor. Inside each were 3 to 4 people, huddled together on bare floors. "One of your holy men is dying," my guard explained dispassionately. "The boss wants him alive for now." They led me to a cell where a man lay on the ground, his breathing labored. It wasn't Father Tomas, but another priest I didn't recognize. He had been severely beaten, with multiple broken ribs and internal bleeding. I knelt beside him, assessing his injuries while fighting back tears of rage and helplessness. "I need proper medical equipment," I insisted. "He needs a hospital." "Fix him here or watch him die," was the cold reply. I did what I could with the limited supplies they provided, stabilizing the priest and cleaning his wounds. As I worked, he regained consciousness briefly. His eyes found mine, and he whispered, "Others. 15 of us. Different faiths. All believers." Then with surprising strength he gripped my wrist. "Our Lady," she promised. "She comes in blue light." Before I could ask what he meant, he lapsed back into unconsciousness. When I finished treating him, I asked to see the other prisoners. To my surprise, they agreed, perhaps thinking it would break my spirit to witness their suffering. Cell by cell, I was allowed brief visits. I found Father Tomas in the 3rd cell, barely recognizable from beatings. There were Catholic priests, Protestant pastors, and lay Christians who had worked in community organization. Some had been there for months, subjected to regular torture and malnourishment. They were permitted to keep small religious items, a Bible page, a wooden cross, a rosary, as if their captors took pleasure in watching faith fail in the face of suffering. In each cell, I provided what medical care I could while whispering words of hope. I promised to find a way to help them, though I had no idea how. When I returned to my quarters that night, I wept until exhaustion claimed me. The next day, I was taken back to the underground prison to check on the injured priest. His condition had stabilized, but he remained critical. As I changed his bandages, he woke again, more lucid this time. "Gabriel," he whispered, though I'd never told him my name. "Our Lady of Aparecida. We've been praying the novena. Today is the 9th day." His cracked lips formed a smile. "She will not abandon us." I nodded, humoring what I thought was delirium. I wasn't unfamiliar with Our Lady of Aparecida, Brazil's patron saint whose image was found by poor fishermen in the Paraíba River. But I had never expected divine intervention in such a hopeless situation. That evening, I was kept in the facility, told my services might be needed again. I was given a small room above the underground prison, with a guard posted outside. Through my window, I could see storm clouds gathering, unusual for that time of year. The air felt charged, expectant. Around midnight, a commotion erupted below. Shouts and running footsteps echoed through the building. My guard rushed in, ordering me to follow him. "The prisoners," he barked. "Something's happening." We descended to the underground cells, where an inexplicable scene awaited. A strange blue light pulsed from within each cell, though there was no apparent source. The guards were in disarray, some firing their weapons at the light, others backing away in terror. My guard shoved me toward the first cell. "See what's happening! Fix this!" he demanded. Though what medical science could do against this phenomenon, I couldn't imagine. I approached the cell where I had treated the injured priest. Through the bars, I saw him sitting upright, his face transformed. The wounds and bruises remained, but his expression was one of rapturous joy. Above him, the blue light coalesced, taking shape, the unmistakable silhouette of a woman in flowing robes, her hands extended in blessing. The image grew more distinct, until I could see her clearly. Our Lady of Aparecida, just as she appears in the famous Brazilian basilica, but alive with light and movement. Her dark features were kind yet powerful, her eyes filled with bottomless compassion. In her right hand, she held what looked like a key made of pure light. The guard behind me saw it too. He fired his weapon, but the bullet seemed to dissolve in the blue radiance. The apparition moved toward the cell door, and as her light key touched the lock, it melted away. One by one, throughout the underground prison, the same miracle repeated. Cell doors opened, chains fell away from wrists and ankles, all amid the soft blue glow that seemed to both soothe the prisoners and confound their captors. I stood frozen, witnessing what my rational mind insisted was impossible. The figure turned to me, and though her lips didn't move, I heard her voice clearly in my mind. "Take them to safety, my son. Their suffering has not been forgotten." The guards were fleeing now, some crying out that the place was cursed. I moved from cell to cell, helping the weakened prisoners to their feet. Father Tomas grasped my hand, his eyes clear despite his injuries. "She came," he said simply, "just as she promised." What happened next defies logical explanation. The 15 prisoners, many of whom had been too weak to stand moments before, found strength to walk. We ascended the stairs and found the facility in chaos. Guards ran in all directions, seemingly blind to our presence. A path cleared before us to the perimeter fence, which had inexplicably been breached. Beyond the fence stood Sister Maria with a group of villagers. How they knew to come, how they had passed the cartel's security, I never learned. But they were there with vehicles, ready to transport the freed prisoners to safety. As we crossed the threshold from captivity to freedom, I looked back one last time. The blue light remained visible only within the prison compound, illuminating what appeared to be the figure of Our Lady standing guard, ensuring our escape. The journey back to the village remains a blur in my memory, the mixture of pain, jubilation, and disbelief. The freed prisoners were distributed among safe houses, their injuries treated, their recovery begun. International organizations were finally contacted, and within days, security forces arrived to investigate the cartel's operations. What they found at the mining facility was abandoned buildings, discarded weapons, and inexplicable blue residue on the cell locks and chains. In the months that followed, I documented every testimony. Each freed prisoner described the same miracle. Our Lady of Aparecida appearing in blue light, breaking their chains, restoring their strength enough to escape. Medical examinations showed their injuries were real, but their recovery rates defied explanation. Faith had sustained them in darkness, and faith had ultimately delivered them. I remained in the village for another year, helping to rebuild the community and establish better security. Father Tomas recovered and resumed his ministry, his faith strengthened rather than broken by his ordeal. The cartel's power in the region diminished as their reputation for invincibility shattered. As for me, my understanding of medicine and faith underwent a profound transformation. I had always believed both could coexist, but now I knew they were intertwined in ways beyond my comprehension. Science explains how our bodies heal, but sometimes healing comes from a place beyond physical laws. Today, a small shrine stands at the site of the former prison. Pilgrims come from across Brazil to leave offerings. small chains made of silver or paper, symbolizing the bonds that Our Lady broke that night. I visit once a year, leaving my own symbolic chain and remembering what I witnessed. Some call it mass hallucination. Others suggest a combination of natural phenomena and psychological trauma created shared delusions. As a doctor, I understand these explanations. But as someone who stood in that blue light, who saw chains melt away and wounds begin to heal, I know what I experienced was real. Our Lady of Aparecida, patron saint of Brazil, intervened when all human help had failed. She broke chains that night, not just the metal ones that bound wrists and ankles, but the chains of hopelessness and abandonment that had wrapped around hearts. In our darkest moment, when faith was all we had left, that faith manifested as blue light and a mother's loving protection. What I haven't revealed until now, what I couldn't bring myself to speak of even years after our rescue, was the deeper truth about why I was really in that village. The medical mission was genuine but incomplete. I had another purpose, one buried beneath layers of my own carefully constructed identity. A purpose tied to a faded photograph I'd carried since childhood, showing a woman with familiar eyes holding an infant beside a small church that matched the one in Santa Helena. My mother had revealed the truth on her deathbed 3 years earlier, her voice barely audible in the sterile hospital room. "Your father wasn't who I said he was, Gabriel," she'd whispered. "Your real father was a missionary in the Amazon. I was young, working as a translator. We fell in love, but he was already married. When I told him about you, he disappeared back to his village." She pressed the photograph into my palm. "Santa Helena. That's where he went. That's where part of your story remains unwritten." I had built my life around a false narrative. The mathematics professor I called father, the comfortable São Paulo upbringing. Learning at 35 that my existence began in deception shattered the foundation of my identity. Medicine had always called to me, but the decision to join Médicos da Esperança was driven by more than altruism. I was searching for the man in the photograph, for the other half of my origins. This secret mission remained locked inside me during those months in Santa Helena. I examined elderly faces, searching for resemblance. I asked casual questions about past missionaries. Then, one evening, Paulo mentioned a name that made my heart stop. Father Eduardo Santiago. "He served here 20 years ago," Paulo said. "Built the original clinic before returning to Manaus. The older villagers still speak of his healing work." I nearly dropped the medical supplies I was organizing. "Do you know what happened to him?" Paulo shrugged. "Some say he died in a boating accident. Others believe he joined an isolated tribe deeper in the jungle. But Joaquim, the village elder, he might know more. They were close. I never got to speak with Joaquim before our world exploded into violence. My personal quest was buried beneath the more immediate crisis of the kidnappings. Yet somehow, in that underground prison, as I moved from cell to cell treating the captives, my two missions, the stated and the secret, converged in ways I couldn't have imagined. In the cell farthest from the entrance, I found an elderly man I hadn't seen during my first visit. He lay curled on his side, his white beard matted with blood. When I turned him gently to examine his injuries, his eyes fluttered open, eyes the same unusual amber color as my own. "Another angel," he murmured deliriously. "They keep sending angels to torment me." "I'm a doctor," I explained softly. "I'm here to help." His gaze sharpened, focusing on my face with sudden clarity. "Gabriel," he whispered, the name emerging as a question, an impossibility. My hands froze on his broken ribs. "How do you know my name?" He smiled through cracked lips. "Because I gave it to you. Gabriel, God's messenger. I chose it before you were born." In that moment, surrounded by suffering, in the bowels of a makeshift prison, I found myself face to face with Eduardo Santiago, the missionary, the healer, my father, the man who had abandoned my mother and disappeared back into the jungle. "You have her expression," he continued weakly. when you concentrate, the same furrow between your eyebrows. I should have felt rage, or at least the cold satisfaction of confrontation. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness, as though I'd been prepared for every emotion except the absence of feeling. I continued treating his wounds mechanically, my doctor's training taking over, while my mind struggled to process the collision of past and present. "Why are you here?" I finally asked, applying antiseptic to a gash on his forehead. "Punishment," he replied simply. "For my sins. I spoke against the cartel, yes, but this," he gestured weakly at the cell, "this feels like divine justice. For abandoning us?" His eyes filled with tears. "For abandoning everyone who ever needed me. Your mother, you, this village, my wife and children in Manaus. I've spent 20 years running from my failures, moving from village to village, trying to outpace my shame through service. I wanted to hate him. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times during the journey to Santa Helena, the righteous accusation, the demand for explanation. But faced with this broken old man, my script dissolved. What remained was a physician's duty to heal, and the dawning realization that I was treating both the wounds on his body and somehow the wounds in my own history. Our conversation was cut short by the guard's return. I moved to the next cell, my mind reeling. When the blue light appeared hours later, when Our Lady of Aparecida manifested to free the captives, the miracle carried a secondary significance I've never shared until now. As the chains fell away from my father's wrists, I felt invisible chains releasing within my own heart. The night of our escape held another revelation that I've kept guarded these many years. As we fled through the jungle, Eduardo collapsed. I carried him on my back, his feeble breath against my neck, his blood soaking through my shirt. We stopped in a small clearing, and I laid him down to check his condition. The others continued ahead with Sister Maria, promising to send help back for us. Alone with my father under a canopy of stars, I finally asked the question that had driven me across Brazil. "Why did you leave her, leave us?" Eduardo's breathing was labored, each word an effort. "Fear," he confessed, "not of responsibility, of inadequacy. Your mother deserved someone whole. I was already broken, divided between families, between worlds." He grasped my hand with surprising strength. "I've carried a photograph of her holding you. For 20 years, it's been my silent penance." "The same photograph she gave me," I realized aloud. He nodded, then reached into his tattered shirt, removing a small wooden medallion of Our Lady of Aparecida. "I've prayed to her every day to protect you both, to lead you away from my failings. Yet she led me directly to you," I said, the irony unmistakable. "Our Lady's mercy often looks like poetry," he whispered, pressing the medallion into my palm. "She knows healing sometimes requires confronting what wounded us." We stayed in that clearing for hours, the jungle sounds creating a natural confessional space around us. Eduardo shared the story of his fractured life, his early missionary work meeting my mother, his return to his wife in Manaus weighed down by guilt, his eventual breakdown and disappearance into the remote villages where he served as penance rather than calling. "I told myself I was protecting everyone by staying away," he explained. "Your mother could build a life without the shame of my betrayal. My wife wouldn't have to face my infidelity. You would have a chance at an untainted life. But secrets create their own wounds," I said, thinking of my mother's deathbed confession, the years of half-truths that had shaped my understanding of myself. "Yes," he agreed, "I see that now. Too late, perhaps, but I see it." His eyes drifted toward the stars. "The miracle tonight. I've never witnessed anything like it, but I'm not sure I deserve freedom." Before I could respond, the blue light appeared again, condensing between us in the clearing. Our Lady of Aparecida formed from the radiance, more distinct than before. She knelt beside Eduardo, her luminous hand touching his forehead. Though no words were spoken aloud, I sensed an exchange. Forgiveness offered, accepted with tears. The apparition turned to me, and I felt her presence examining the tangled knot of emotions in my chest. The resentment, confusion, and strange relief. Her expression conveyed understanding beyond judgment. The light between us intensified, and in that radiance I saw flashes of my father's life, his genuine love for my mother, his tortured prayers for us both, the weight of his choices pressing him deeper into isolation. Not excuses, but context. Not absolution, but comprehension. When the light faded, something had changed in both of us. Eduardo's breathing had steadied, his wounds visibly less severe. Within me, the rigid narrative I'd constructed about abandonment and betrayal had softened into something more complex. A human story rather than a mythic injury. We were found by villagers an hour later and brought to safety. Eduardo survived his injuries, though he never fully recovered his strength. We had 3 months together before pneumonia claimed him. 3 months of difficult conversations, painful recognitions, and slow steps towards something that, while not quite forgiveness, created space for grief unburdened by anger. On his final day, as his breathing grew increasingly shallow, Eduardo looked at me with perfect clarity. "The miracle wasn't just the blue light or the broken chains," he whispered. "It was finding you, being found by you." After he passed, I discovered a journal among his few possessions. Its pages revealed a man divided not just between families, but between faith and doubt, certainty and questioning. He had documented countless small miracles throughout his years of service, unexpected recoveries, fortuitous meetings, moments of inexplicable grace. Yet he had also recorded his darkest thoughts, his sense of unworthiness, his fear that his dual betrayals had placed him beyond redemption. The final entry, written the day before his capture, read, "I dreamt of Gabriel last night, not as the infant in the photograph, but as a man. In the dream, he was a healer, his hands steadier than mine ever were. Perhaps this is wishful thinking, the mind's attempt to create order from my chaos. Or perhaps it is Our Lady preparing me for what comes next. I sense an ending approaching. May it bring peace to those I've wounded." This journal became my inheritance, not land or wealth, but a chronicle of a flawed man's struggle toward wholeness. I recognized in his words my own tendency to compartmentalize, to create artificial boundaries between science and faith, between professional duty and personal longing. Reading his journey helped me integrate parts of myself I had kept separate, like parallel lives that never intersected. The aftermath of the miracle transformed everyone differently. For Father Thomas, it reinforced an already unshakable faith. For Sister Maria, it provided validation of her pragmatic approach to spirituality. "Pray as though everything depends on God. Work as though everything depends on you," she often said. For the villagers, it established Santa Helena as a place of pilgrimage, bringing both blessing and complication. For me, the transformation worked in layers, like geological strata being gradually exposed. The most visible change was my decision to remain in Santa Helena after Eduardo's death, expanding the clinic into a regional medical center that combined conventional medicine with traditional healing practices. I trained local practitioners, creating a sustainable system that wouldn't collapse when outside help withdrew. The deeper changes involved my understanding of family and identity. I located Eduardo's wife in Manaus, my father's widow, though I struggled to classify our relationship. Her name was Isabella, and she received me with a grace I hadn't anticipated. She had known about my existence for years, she revealed, showing me letters Eduardo had sent during his self-imposed exile. He was haunted by what he considered his greatest failures, she explained as we sat in her modest home, surrounded by photographs of a life I had never known existed. But his greatest failure wasn't loving 2 women. It was believing he could segment his heart without consequences. From Isabella, I learned I had 2 half-siblings, Luisa, a university professor in Rio, and Miguel, a carpenter who still lived in Manaus. Our first meeting was awkward, decades of separation creating a chasm that politeness couldn't fully bridge. Yet over time, a cautious relationship formed, not the instant brotherhood of childhood bonds, but the measured connection of adults discovering unexpected commonality. "He spoke of you," Luisa told me during her second visit to Santa Helena. "Not often, and never in detail, but sometimes he would mention having a son who didn't know him. He would say it with such sadness that we learned not to ask questions." I showed her the journal, and she recognized the handwriting immediately. "He kept journals throughout our childhood," she said, "always writing, always recording. When he disappeared, he took them all. Mother said it was because he couldn't bear to leave pieces of himself behind." Slowly, through these connections, I reconstructed a more complete picture of Eduardo Santiago, not the abandoning father of my imagination or the saintly healer of village legend, but a complex man whose capacity for compassion was matched by his capacity for self-deception. A man who, in trying to protect everyone, had wounded them instead. A man whose greatest gift to his children was, perhaps, the opportunity to avoid his mistakes. The blue light of Our Lady's presence had illuminated not just the prison cells, but the shadowed corners of family history. What had been obscured by shame and silence, my origin, Eduardo's divided life, the ripple effects of secrets kept too long, was finally visible, not healed instantly, not resolved without effort, but acknowledged, named, given space in the narrative. 5 years after the miracle, I received a letter from the injured priest whose treatment had brought me face to face with Eduardo. He had recovered fully and returned to ministry in Argentina. "I still see the blue light sometimes," he wrote. "Not with my physical eyes, but in moments of despair, when hope seems a foreign language. I've come to believe that what we witnessed wasn't just divine intervention in a single moment, but the revelation of what exists constantly just beyond our perception, a mother's vigilant love, a readiness to break whatever imprisons us." His words resonated with my evolving understanding of that night. The miracle hadn't been a suspension of natural law, so much as a glimpse behind the veil, showing us what had always been true but rarely visible, that our isolation is an illusion, that our compartmentalized lives are a human construct rather than a divine intention. I keep the wooden medallion Eduardo gave me on a simple cord around my neck, not as a lucky charm or protective talisman, but as a reminder of complexity, of how light and shadow coexist, of how the same person can cause both wound and healing, of how faith operates not in despite of our contradictions, but through them. Last month, 10 years after the events I've described, I returned to the abandoned mining facility. A small chapel now stands near the entrance, built by former prisoners and local families. Inside, a painting depicts Our Lady of Aparecida, with keys of light unlocking chains. Beneath it, visitors have left handwritten notes describing their own imprisonments, some physical, most internal, addictions, resentments, failures of courage, secrets maintained at terrible cost. Reading these testimonies, I recognize the universal nature of captivity. Few experience literal dungeons, but many build cells within themselves, becoming both prisoner and jailer. My father had done this, constructing elaborate justifications that isolated him from those he loved. In my own way, I had done the same, allowing the narrative of abandonment to define my boundaries and limitations. The miracle we experienced wasn't just liberation from external chains, but an invitation to examine the internal ones, to question whether the stories we tell ourselves about our lives are structures that support us or confine us. I still practice medicine, dividing my time between Santa Helena and São Paulo. I've married a woman named Teresa, who runs an educational program for children in remote villages. We have 2 children who know the complex truth of their grandfather. his failures and his faithfulness, his divisions and his devotion. We visit Isabella regularly, maintaining the connections that Eduardo couldn't sustain. The blue light appears less frequently now, but it hasn't abandoned me entirely. I catch glimpses in unexpected moments, while delivering a child in a village without electricity, while reconciling with my half-brother after a misunderstanding, while standing at my mother's grave with the courage to finally feel the grief I had held at bay for years. These manifestations are brief, easily dismissed as imagination or emotion. But I recognize them as reminders of continuity, that the miracle didn't end when the chains fell away, that liberation is an ongoing process rather than a single event. Our Lady continues her work in quieter ways, illuminating one shadow at a time, unlocking one door and then the next. I share this testimony now because I believe others need to hear it, not just the dramatic story of supernatural rescue, but the subtler miracle of how confronting buried truths can free us from self-imposed confinements. In a world where suffering often seems to have the final word, there are moments when divine mercy breaks through the barriers we've built around our hearts and histories. I've returned to practicing medicine with a broader understanding of healing, one that addresses not just physical symptoms, but the complex interplay of body, mind, spirit, and story. I treat patients with scientific knowledge and awareness that recovery often requires reconciliation with the past, integration of fragmented selves, and restoration of broken connections. Sometimes, when working with patients facing impossible odds, I catch glimpses of that blue light at the edge of my vision. I've learned to recognize it as a reminder that even in our darkest prisons, whether constructed of concrete or conviction, we are not forgotten. Our Lady still watches, still intercedes, still breaks the chains that bind us. Do you believe in miracles? Perhaps you've experienced one yourself, not necessarily as dramatic as glowing apparitions and melting locks, but as profound. A moment when hope arrived against all odds, when something impossible became possible, when a long-maintained barrier within yourself suddenly dissolved. Our faith grows stronger when we share these stories, not just of divine intervention, but of human transformation. If Our Lady of Aparecida has touched your life, or if this account has stirred something in your heart, I invite you to reflect on the chains you carry and the possibility that liberation awaits, not just from external circumstances, but from the narratives that no longer serve your becoming. The same compassion that filled that prison cell with blue light is available to all who seek it. Our Lady waits, keys of light in hand, ready to unlock what binds us, even the doors we've locked ourselves.